faith is a message.
Were you going to say something a moment ago?
Well, the way I see it, the concealing, if Paul's case was all right, the concealing that they did, that she was in either case did, using normal means, they didn't go out of the way of trying to make something look abnormal, then that appears to be all right. Because there was a reason for them not to be caught in either case. That would be thwarting God's plan of what he was doing. And so that appears to be okay. But when the spies, or when the people came seeking after these men, then what was told was they were not here, they were gone, and so forth. I don't think we're told, did the spies then, or the people go then searching out everything in the house or not?
Doesn't appear like they did.
They didn't, apparently. So all that I think would have to be said is search my place. And that's what the answer of either the woman in either case could have been. And she would have to then rely on the method of hiding as being sufficient for protection.
Okay.
I don't think that would work either, because in most of the cases in the Old Testament, they're both no, they're both implying that nobody is hiding underneath the flax or nobody's hiding in the well.
Now, some people say that's not necessarily her implying that.
Well, they're implying that by because their statements are to the contrary.
Well, let's forget their statements for the moment.
I said they didn't have to make a statement. They could let the intruders come and search the house.
Okay, but
say nothing.
Even by doing that, you're implying that they're not there. Because
No.
you certainly wouldn't let them search. You certainly wouldn't let them search.
Well, you were on the other side now, though. You're going to make a fatal mistake here in a moment. 3 strikes and you're out. No, we need an antagonistic one that'll argue at some point. Too many people get on one side, we don't have anyone to argue the other point.
It seems like they're implying that they're not there. Okay, where Paul's not implying that he's not there, he just escaped out the window.
No, the reverse would be true. You wouldn't let somebody come and search if you had somebody hiding.
Right. So if you said,
come in and
you're implying that they're not there.
This will be finished tonight in the bedroom. Let's. You want to just stop here this morning? We're running out of time, it looks like.
You want that family split until when?
Let's look at another passage then. Let's look at John chapter 8. John chapter 8 and verse 59. Jesus pretty much claims deity. He said, before Abraham was born, I am. At this, they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. In what manner? Now, a whole lot of people have assumed that passages like this speak of some type of supernatural protection of Christ. But I would say that the burden of proof would be on that person to prove there's something supernatural here. To me, the reading is Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. Well, if you're just going to turn yourself invisible, you don't have to have this slipping away from the temple grounds. He is, to me anyway, he is hiding himself, and he does slip away, and he's not, as a lot of charismatics have read these passages, just making himself invisible. All right, chapter 10 of this gospel, chapter 10 and verse 39. Again they tried to seize him, and he escaped their grasp. Now we're in the precincts of the temple, and you know something of what the temple precincts looked like. The temple was just one building, but there were colonnades and porches and storerooms and arches and gates and walls everywhere. I mean, it was a child's delight if they would have been allowed to play hide and seek in a place like that. There would just be 101 places to hide. Whenever we're told here that Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds, you may have a difficult time picturing Jesus bending over and sneaking away somehow, but that appears to be what's taking place here. They are after him. They take up stones to kill him. And he evidently takes off at, I would probably say, a rather brisk pace, because people are after you, and you're weaving your way in and out of the colonnades and the porches and the gates and the walls and all the precincts there. And if we want to speculate, and we're going beyond the text here, but maybe he gets into one room and here the people come, and so he ducks behind a pillar over here and hides there, and do those people get by, and then he backtracks and heads the other way. Somehow, we're told he was slipping away from the temple grounds. And I don't think my caricature of that is probably that far from the truth. Now, Paul can always be wrong, and those two Old Testament passages can always be wrong, but Jesus can never be wrong.
Amen.
So we know what he has done here is right. I guess for some people it would probably still be a question of a connection or a relationship between the method and the way in which he performed this and those two in the Old Testament. Not so much Paul, it doesn't seem like, but those two in the Old Testament. So he is hiding. But I mean, if there was any backtracking involved, if there was any, I mean, he hid himself. It doesn't just say he took off running. It said he hid himself. That means people come looking for you, and you hide. So does that mean that if they're coming and looking for you, and there's a big pillar there, of the temple, and you duck behind that, are you implying, this would be the question, are you implying that you are not in the vicinity?
You're not implying it. The situation is implying it.
They're assuming it.
You're just hiding.
We know that Jesus can't practice any form of deception that's contrary to the will of God. If we want to call it deception here, we better put it in quotation marks, because it's approved deception, whatever it is. And it's involving action. It's not involving anything that he's saying. But if you're hiding behind the pillar, what are you implying there? Are you implying or are you not? Are you implying I'm not here in the vicinity? Or are you just implying I'm behind the pillar? I can stand behind this pillar if I want to. I can stand behind it whether people are chasing me or not. Of course, we know why he's behind it, so they don't see him. Well, is there anything wrong with making sure someone doesn't see you?
Obviously, it can't be wrong, otherwise Jesus wouldn't have done it.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I guess almost we're through this morning then, if we looked at that. But not really. All the philosophical and the mental workings of all of this seem to be interesting, because you do have to start narrowing things down and start talking about implications versus assumptions. What are you implying versus what are they assuming? Because to me it doesn't seem like, if you want to stand behind the pillar, that you necessarily are implying that you are not here in the area. The only thing you're implying is I am trying to hide from you. You're not implying that I'm not here. On the contrary, you're implying I am here and I don't want you to find me. So it just depends on how you look at that. You see, it's one thing to say you're implying that you're not there. It's another thing that you're implying, on the contrary, you are there, or you wouldn't be behind the pillar. If you wanted to imply that you were there, you wouldn't go behind the pillar. So it depends on how the person wants to look at that then. If you go behind the pillar, you're not necessarily implying that you're not there. You're probably implying that you are there, and you don't want to be found. So it's back to, I think, what this brother's had to say, the assumptions that you're working on in someone else's mind. How can you capitalize on those assumptions so that you don't have to come out and do anything wrong yourself? How can you capitalize on their assumptions? In other words, this is very real life. What if someone comes seeking your beloved pastor's life? What are you going to do with me? Just throw me out to the lions or the wolves out there? Or are you going to build a car for me with a fake bottom to it and I'll hide down there and somehow escape? If we've got some secret compartment like that, and our enemies are after us, is that not misrepresenting my presence? Is that implying that I am not there? Well, you see, you could be saying, I am not here, or the implication could be, I am here, but I will not let you find me. There is an implication, and that implication is built on the assumption the people will have whenever you build a car with a false bottom to it, or a stagecoach with a false bottom to it, or a trunk with a false bottom to it. Depends on how you look at that person. Is that person saying, I'm not here? Obviously that person is not saying, I'm not here. He would rather not be there. Obviously the person is there. He knows that he's there. You almost imply that you are there by making sure they can't see you. It's a very interesting philosophical mental twist that you almost have to take to this. And then some people say, now wait a minute, sophistry is what that sounds like to me. Sophistry. But we've got these interesting cases of Christ here slipping, especially the last verse in John 8, of slipping out of the temple and he's hiding himself. Do you see how, even if you don't agree with me, how what I am saying could be right? It could be true to fact that you're not saying I'm not here. On the contrary, by virtue of the fact you're hiding, you're saying I am here, and I do not want you to find me. And I will do whatever's necessary, whatever I am allowed to do to make sure that you don't find me. So that to me sounds right, how we should interpret these passages, and therefore what the truthful use of strategy is. And therefore there's no point in making any distinctions between fleeing, hiding, and sneaky hiding. There are different things. One, you just take off running and you see if you can outrun the people or whatever. But we don't need to make any moral or philosophical distinctions between it. Say, now, fleeing is all right and just walking behind the tree is okay, but not hollowing the tree out and getting inside of it and building a fake tree door over the outside of it, though. Well, what's the difference between walking behind the tree or hollowing out the tree? And you say, no, wait a minute, most trees aren't hollowed out with people living inside them. So you are implying something different than normally is. Well, that's not necessarily true at all, though. I don't know that I see a difference between being inside that tree, hollowed out, and being behind that tree. If you mean that you're implying some deceit to these other people, sure, that maybe is not the ordinary. But that's generally the way you hide in non-ordinary ways. Or if you don't hide in a non-ordinary way, you're not hiding then. Because no person, if these people are after Jesus, no person crouches behind a pillar over in the corner, to read the specks of marble or something.
Would you say that you're only trying to represent the ordinary, you're not trying to misrepresent the truth?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say that. I might even stay off that turf or that territory. I would keep it on the assumptions of the other people whenever they come along.
That's where you go to the Bibles and the cotton bales and you put each bottom in the box. It looks all perfectly normal. If they don't go searching and find it themselves,
yeah, see, the implication is, but we hate to do that because you're misrepresenting the facts as they really are. We say, well, if you're looking for something, the burden of discovery is on you then. If I am the one hiding and you are the one looking, the burden of discovery is on the seeker, not on the salt. I mean, we just assume that when we go hunting, when we go fishing, or anything. We assume that the burden of the catch or the kill is on the one out after the animal or the fish. We don't expect the animal to jump out and say, well, I can't run or hide. That would be dishonest and imply that I'm not really around in this area or something. No, we don't think that at all. We think he is perfectly within his right to do whatever he can, camouflage himself, hide or whatever, run, escape. And that the burden of discovery is on the shoulders of the seeker and not the salt. Now, if that is our philosophy, then these passages are fine with us as far as the very actions that were performed here. Well, the verbal lies would still be wrong then. Yeah, the verbal lies would be wrong. Yeah. Now, what do you want to say when someone comes up? I don't know. I mean, he could have said search. You could just say no comment. You change the subject, say, well, it's a nice day today, isn't it? I mean, it's all obvious what you're doing. You're not deceiving anyone if they're coming and looking for them. But you certainly can't say they've gone in that direction, or I saw them go over there, or they're over there, and really they're over here. You just can't do anything like that. And it seems like God protected these people, and He probably would have protected them even without those spoken lies, just with the truthful strategy that was employed here. Jesus doesn't have to lie. Paul doesn't have to lie. They just use some strategy. Let's go on and look at a few more things, and then we'll wrap up this morning. I think we have enough material just to finish this out. So, to hide or flee from one's enemies is not a misrepresentation of the truth. Joshua 2:6, 2 Samuel 17, 15-22, 2 Corinthians 11, 32-33, John 8:59, John 10:39. Paul, not a few times, now watch this, Paul, not a few times, evidently made use of wise strategy to escape unnecessary punishment. Now let's look at these portions in Acts. We've seen them before. Acts 23, this is a humorous one, Acts 23, verses 6-9. Paul, not a few times, evidently made use of wise strategy to escape unnecessary punishment. Acts 23, 6-9. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee." He knew what tumult that was going to cause. "The son of a Pharisee, I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead." And when he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Now surely Paul knew what he was getting into, and he knew what he was doing here, and he did it for that purpose. Why strategy? In other words, Paul is working on the assumptions he knows these two groups have before him, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He's going to work on their assumptions of either a belief in the resurrection or a denial of the resurrection. So he says, I know how I'll get out of this, yet I've just been hit in the face here because I answered the high priest in the wrong fashion. So I know how I'll get out of this. I'll trick them to get their eyes off of me and to put their eyes on something else. And you could say, well, that's the same that's happening when a person is hiding or in one of these fashions, getting their eyes off of you and putting their eyes on something else, putting their eyes with their assumptions based on whatever it is they want to think about or talk about. I mean, he knew this was going to happen. We don't seem to have any problem with this in Scripture, that he could divert their attention by talking about the ordinary. And that was a debate very current between these two groups of religious leaders over the truthfulness of the resurrection. Then in chapter 22, verses 24 and 25, not the same as the other cases, but I'm just saying that Paul made use of wise strategy to escape unnecessary punishment. The commander ordered, and I guess the reason I'm looking at this is some people, if you go too far with truthfulness, think that you have to be ignorant and just tell them everything, so help my God, to make sure I didn't lie to these people. And you could never use wise strategy, because that shows that you're afraid of persecution then. The commander ordered Paul to be taken into the barracks. He directed that he be flogged and questioned in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. As they stretched him out to flog him, Paul waited to the last moment. I mean, that was the opportune climactic time there. Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? Paul's asking a question that he knows the answer to. So couldn't that be said, well, that's deceptive. He knows the answer to that, but he's got to state it in such a way that it has a dramatic effect on his persecutor here. The last question, is it really legal to do this? I'm a Roman citizen. Oh, and that must have stunned this man. We know that it did. When the centurion heard this, well, he went to the commander and reported, what are you going to do? This man's a Roman citizen. Paul used wise strategy to escape punishment. Again, it's always in the context of persecution. Then in chapter 22 and verse 12, we've pointed this one out, I remember years ago in Acts, that I really like this. Now Paul's been arrested in chapter 21, and he's being carried up the steps to the fortress of Antonia to be locked up in there, and he asked Claudius Lysias, the leader of the Roman soldiers there, let me say a word. And he said, well, okay, the end of chapter 21. And when they were all silent, he said to them in Aramaic, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. He goes right down with a list of the specifics of his conversion from Acts 9. Getting down into verse 10. What shall I do, Lord, he asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you'll be told all that you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. Well, now, how true is that statement that Paul makes there? Ananias was a tongue-talking, spirit-filled, believing in divine healing Christian is what he was. He's the one who he believed in visions. God talked to him in a vision. He went and laid hands on Saul. He got filled with the Spirit. He's healed. He rises up. He's baptized. Is this not a coloring of the man Ananias in such a way so that Paul won't be unnecessarily rather, antagonistic in his presentation of his defense before these Jewish people? You're not going to tell the people there that this man's a Christian just like me. He's a part of the sect of the Nazarenes. You're going to say that he's a devout observer of the law, and I'm sure by what Paul meant with a devout observer of the law, I'm sure Ananias was. Because Paul's an observer of the law from chapter 21, remember. That's how he ends up in jail, and highly respected by all the Jews living there. Well, I'm sure in whatever sense Paul meant highly respected of the Jews living there, I'm sure Ananias was. But he very specifically colors his presentation of Ananias in such a way that it fits the context here. Without telling a lie, he's not going to say, well, Ananias is not a Christian. Well, he couldn't say something like that. He can only go so far in how he describes Ananias. And he's not going to describe him as a Christian, baptized in the Holy Spirit, and believes in visions and divine healing. He colors him just enough so that what he says is true, but at the same time it's not prematurely or unnecessarily antagonistic in the ears of the Jewish listeners. 22:12, where he describes Ananias only as it fits the present need. And finally, though I am not always in agreement with Felix's theology and his theological ethics, Grand Rapids, William B. Erdman's Publishing Company, 1979, Volume 1, page 545, Hellman has an interesting paragraph on spoken and written strategy used in social politeness. Just practicing common etiquette, as I have briefly alluded to earlier, can sweep one into a river brimming with social lies. This is what he's saying here. By the agreement of common convention, I begin a letter courteously with the polite salutation, dear, even though I actually regard the recipient as a fool. And I end my letter to a scoundrel with a complimentary close such as, respectfully yours, even though I have no respect for him whatsoever but only contempt. Indeed, I often say goodbye, a shortened form of God be with you, when what I really mean is go to the devil. So, of course, he's bringing up the whole question, well, if we believe that dishonesty is wrong and we should avoid it, then may we begin a letter to a fool with dear and end it with respectfully yours and say goodbye to people that we know are going to hell.
For the continuation of this
Chapter 13. It's a passage we haven't looked at yet. 2 Samuel chapter 13, first part of the chapter, is the chapter about Amnon raping his half-sister Tamar. Especially verses 5 and 6, and then even down to verses 22 through 29. Now, Absalom is a full brother of Tamar. They're both half-brothers to Amnon. Same father, David, but different mothers. Here's a case we've looked at two earlier where evidently no duplicity or no deceit is involved, no misrepresentation is involved in the actions employed by these two women. Here's a different case, though, or at least it would seem to be that. Here, of course, Amnon wants to lie with his own sister. So he concocts this strategy of pretending as though he were sick. Well, I can't get out of bed, and the only thing that's going to make me feel better, he even tells this to his father, King David, is if my own sister bakes me something, and not in her home, if I can watch her do it and knead all the dough with her own hands, and then bring it to me and feed it to me right here on my bed. We know what an evil purpose is behind all of that, and an evil outcome of all of that. Therefore, to me, in my mind, it would set that in a different light, in a different boat entirely than these earlier two cases of the people hiding in the well and the spies hiding on the top of Rahab's house. Because, of course, he's able to trick and deceive everyone. He carries through with his plot to force his own half-sister, and then hates her with a greater hatred than the love with which he had earlier loved her, which was just no love. It was what the Bible calls lust. And then also in the same chapter, when you get down the end of it, verses 22 through 29, don't we have Absalom concocting this little scheme of his own, how, well, we're going to have a sheep-shearing party, and we want the king and everyone to come. Well, the king can't come, and I can't send all my sons there. Well, just send Amnon then. Why not just send him along? And the king says no, and Absalom talks him into sending him. Well, why does he want him there? He's going to kill him for raping his sister. So you see, verses 22 to 29, Absalom also is successful in misrepresenting the state of affairs. Maybe they really are having a sheep-shearing party. But his desire to have Amnon there is forced only by his desire to have him executed for what he's done to his sister. So again, I think he misrepresents the situation. And there's an evil plan that initiates it all and has a very evil outcome. It's not like the earlier two cases where two people are simply attempting to preserve their own lives. And they do nothing positively to deceive someone else. They simply refrain from doing anything. That is, they hide. They just stay hidden. They don't do something positively. They do something passively or negatively in that they simply hide. And so it seems like they should be acquitted, whereas these two examples in 2 Samuel 13, these people should be condemned. But I did want to give you one place here in the Scriptures where we actually have misrepresentation by actions, just to show you the difference between, proper strategy that's been used in the earlier two examples and improper strategy used here in 2 Samuel 13, because all of the motives are wrong, the plans are wrong. In Matthew 23:14, or if we want a better text, since maybe that shouldn't even be there in the text, it's okay because it's repeated in Mark 12:40. What does Jesus say? But that you Pharisees, you religious leaders, pray prayers of pretense. You make long prayers to pretend to misrepresent yourself as though you're pious. Well, there I think we've got a case of misrepresentation. What you'd say, well, what's lying? What's wrong with just praying a really long prayer? Well, if you're praying a long prayer and you have the hypocritical heart that these leaders have, that's what Jesus is condemning then. Therefore, they're lying to the people to pray a long prayer. He's not saying there's anything wrong with a long prayer, but that better be from your heart. You better mean that. And he also talks about them in pretense devouring widows' houses as well. Oh, we need money. We need money. The temple needs money. They go out collecting money, and they rob widows and take everything that they own. Well, that also is wrong. And what a parallel we have of things that happen today as well. It's the widows and the poor that are generally robbed by these big ministries. And they don't need the money. That's the point. You say, well, they need it to keep their type of ministry going, but their ministry's false. So still we're back to the fact they don't need that type of money. I could hardly imagine how one ministry needs $100 million a year. That ought to be spread out between many, many, many ministries. One ministry doesn't need $100 million. Now you say, well, what if they're getting 100 million people genuinely converted? Then give them 100 billion a year then. They deserve that if they're going to get 100 million people. But these aren't getting people converted. They're just furthering their own ego. The false prophets in the book of Jeremiah and Ezekiel during their day, they come saying, thus saith the Lord. Well, that's misrepresentation. They're lying. That's a lying in action as well as in word. In action because they're pretending like they're the prophets. In Zechariah 13, talks about false prophets dressing up in hairy garb because they would at least imply that they're true prophets because of the way Elijah had been dressed. Well, that would also be a misrepresentation of the truth. There, by your actions, you're misrepresenting the truth because you're wearing a certain type of clothes intending to deceive people. Now, let's go back to the spoken lie. I know we're talking about big Roman numeral 2 concerning actions, but let's go back to the spoken lie, big Roman numeral 1, concerning the extent of what we say. I think it's also very easy to commit misrepresentation here. And I think particularly this happens in the case where another person's reputation is involved. You have a story or an event that takes place, and only one person tells the story. It involves two people, but only one person tells the story. I think oftentimes it happens when one person is trying to tell the story, and of course we're talking about this from the point of view of them doing it knowingly and doing it maliciously. Not they're trying to do their best and they give all the information they know, but doing it maliciously and evilly so. Where one person is trying to tell the story, what happened, but what he says and the way in which it's said tends to misrepresent the situation as it really happened, or tends, worse than that, to misrepresent the other person involved. They're not around to give their part of the story. Let me give you a couple of examples. For instance, let's say John is really going through a mental struggle, but he's battling this. He's battling honestly to get the victory. And so he confides all of this to Jack. So one night at church, Jack tells me, "Boy, there sure seems to be a cloud over John recently, doesn't there?" And what does that do? But it puts negative thoughts in my mind about John. So I start thinking, I wonder what's wrong with him. And to see Jack, he knows the whole story. Maybe there is a cloud over John, but he didn't tell me the positive side, that it's not that John is just being swallowed up in sin and rebelliousness. John is doing his best to get the victory and to overcome that. So you see, in letting one person tell that story, they misrepresent the other person's point of view and their status entirely. And doing that, and assuming that it's done maliciously, and to tell someone only as much as that person would have told what John said or what Jack said about John, it must be intended maliciously. Why not tell me the whole thing? He's got a cloud over him, but you should have heard yesterday the confessions he was making to me that he's really going to overcome this. He didn't tell me that. All he told me was he's got a cloud over him. Or maybe Cindy misses church one night, and so Mary comes up. I sometimes don't notice who's here, who's not. And Mary comes up later and said, "Cindy wasn't here tonight, was she?" So I say, "That's right. She wasn't here. I don't think I saw her here." And what do you think when someone misses church? But what's going on with them? Why'd they miss? Why weren't they here? They sin, or what went wrong with them? What went wrong in their life? All I know is that Cindy's not here, and Mary pointed that out to me. But you see, Mary knows more of the details. The details are, a child has been going through a battle for 2 straight days. And Cindy's been without sleep for about 30 hours. So there's the true story why she was not at church that night. You see how easy it is just to tell half of the story. It's all right to tell half and conceal half, but the part concealed can't misrepresent anything, though. The part told can't misrepresent anything, especially not if it's done in an evil fashion or maliciously like that. Now I wonder how many times, I don't think that is, a frequent occasion in this church, but how many times things like that, or those seeds of discord are sown in other churches, where little statements are made. I noticed they weren't here tonight, and you know why they weren't there. They had a very legitimate reason for not being there, but you don't tell anybody. You've got something against that person. You're out to get them, and you sow those seeds of discord. And what am I to think? What are you to think when someone comes up to us and tells us that? But we start thinking, yes, Cindy wasn't here tonight, was she? And what would come to our mind first probably would be something negative. I wonder why she's not here. I wonder what she did wrong. And what we need is a little more information of the whole account, the whole story here. She had very legitimate reasons for not being here. So again, I guess the point is you have to be careful what you do and what you say, and you have to be careful with your attitude toward other people. Now, if that's all you know, that Cindy wasn't here, well then there's nothing wrong with making that statement. Cindy wasn't here. But then that leaves both you and me kind of in the dark. We don't know how to reason. We don't know whether to reason positively or negatively. All we know is that she wasn't here. There's nothing wrong with the fact someone's not here. Someone says they're not here and they know why they're not, and the reason why they're not is legitimate. Well, that's something else entirely to start sewing stories like that. So the solution is, after you have told a story to someone about something or someone, you probably didn't tell the whole story. That would take forever to tell the whole thing. Make sure that you didn't leave the person with an inadequate basis for really knowing what happened, at least from your point of view, from what you know took place. Don't leave them with an inadequate basis. Or if you're going to leave them with an inadequate basis, then tell them, this is all I know about the story. So I'm not implying anything negative to you, brother or sister. This is all I know about the story. It's another thing entirely when we know more and we withhold that information. Then I think that we sin against our brother or sister because we misrepresent them before another member of the body. So again, they don't have to know everything. You don't have to know everything. But don't suggest the negative when maybe it doesn't even exist to begin with. Why suggest the negative? Why even start the negative? I wonder why they said this. Well, if you don't know why, then don't speculate why. If you want to know why, go ask them then. That's the easiest thing to do. And we've taught that before in ethics as well. That keeps all of the areas of confusion and misunderstanding out. If you don't know what they meant, you want to know, go ask them. That's the easiest solution I know. They're the one that said it. They know what they said and what they meant by what they said. But if all you take is what they said, then you go speculate on that. Maybe you dream up a negative when no negative is intended at all. Now that's happened with me, against you. It's happening to and about all of us here, where we speculate when we shouldn't speculate because we don't have enough information to come to any valid conclusion at all. All we know is the bare fact that such and such event took place, or such and such a sentence or word was spoken by someone. That's all we know. How am I supposed to know that there was evil behind that? Well, I don't know. So just close your mind to it then. And if you're curious about it, there's nothing wrong with being curious about it, but don't speculate. Go ask the person. I had someone just the other night, or a few weeks ago, I guess, and I'm going to mention this as an example because it fits underlying here. It'll fit under a later category. Someone called me and asked me about something that I had said. You know, this is just, I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to come up with a wrong conclusion, so you're the one who said it, so I think I'll ask you what you meant by this. So I told him what I meant by it. Oh, I see now. I see what the point was, all right? That solves that then. You see, a person can just go on and on and on, wrestling and speculating, and the devil is right there. Wormwood is right there on one's shoulder to suggest the negative in your ear about this person. If you think it's worth investigating, I think this was something that was worth investigating as far as this brother was concerned. If you think it's worth investigating, go back to the source then. Say, brother, I don't mean to appear like I'm calling you a liar or anything. I just want to just know the facts so it'll soothe my own mind and conscience. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If it's worth investigating. Most things aren't even worth investigating. Who cares what they meant? Just forget it. It's no big deal anyway. This was something that could have influenced some other things. So I think he was right. And I told him, I said, well, you should have called me weeks ago. First day you began thinking about it, give me a call and ask me. I said, if I was wrong, I'll tell you I was wrong. And then you can know from now on, well, he was wrong. At least you won't think from now on, I think he was wrong, but he's not telling me that he was wrong, because then that was going to bother him. So the best thing to do is check out the source.